Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. So, I have been working on a new Morningstar image that I've been planning to use as a convention banner. And before we get started, so I've got a couple of comps, and I'm curious which one you like, version A, B, C, or D. Now, on to what I want to talk about in this video. In completing this piece, I really got lost in the woods on it. And I kind of wanted to show you the process of how I worked through that. Because for me, I don't really think I think the tutorials are very valuable, they're very useful, they're very instructive. But I think what's more interesting is seeing what happens when a piece of any sort is not going well, it's not coming out the way you want, and the steps that you take to fix and solve those problems. Because more frequently than not, the problem isn't not knowing the steps to get an end result that when you know the exact result you want. The problem really is trying to figure out how to make a piece in the first place that comes out the way you want it to, trying to figure out what you want that end result to be. Because you start going one direction, then you're like, oh, this direction isn't working. I have a picture in my head of what I want, and I can't quite figure out how to get it to that final place. What I started with, or not really what I started with, but what I had shown online when I did a live stream earlier on, was me working on the value painting for this image. So we've got this gray toned image here, which at the time I thought was coming out pretty well and I was fairly happy with. Even though I'm pretty happy with how this image came out in black and white, I had two big takeaways from this once I moved on to color. And one is that I went too dark with my values. In general, I mean, one of the things you're told when you paint is that very rarely do you actually have absolute black in a painting and absolute white. You usually want to have dark tones. You know, you might have a dark purple or a dark blue or a dark red, whatever, dark values of colors instead of actually black and going all the way to white. It'd have to be a very, very bright light or a reflected light if you want to go to white to it. And also, even when it is a very bright light source, if it's a colored light or if the atmosphere is coloring it, still may not go absolutely too white. So I learned that I went too dark with my values. The whites I think still work because it's like a bright, fiery pentagram that's behind Lucifer in this image. And the other thing I learned is that I did a very poor job of bracketing my values, meaning establishing that the background is one value and then keeping all the tones within that background one color, then establishing the figure in another value range and keeping all the things somewhat within that. Meaning that there's some places in the figure that are as dark as the background, there's some places in the background that are as light as the foreground figure, and I really need to improve on keeping those values bracketed, keeping them more closely related. And that's something I picked up from once I started having problems. I looked at a few different other YouTube tutorials. There's one by Noah Bradley on landscape painting that's really, really good and uploaded recently. And I was looking at that and one of the big things with landscaping is keeping your values bracketed. And of course, I realized these things that apply to landscapes very much also apply to figure drawings as well. You know, there's variations within that. One of the other things I also picked up in terms of going too dark with those values, or actually in terms of trying to help in general, I looked at a YouTube video by Stanley Artgerm Lau on coloring grayscale images, and also one by Sycra, and I'll include links to both of those because they both sort of help me figure out what some of the problems were, or at least a path I could take to solving them. But one of the first things that they pointed out is that a big problem in general with the method I'm using is that it can lead to really dull or quirky colors. And the method that I used was just doing the gray tone image and then creating a new layer and setting the layer on color mode and then just coloring directly on that. And I just figured I would adjust as needed in terms of like going my values and going lighter, darker, whatever I needed to do, like a lighter or darker version of a blue if it wasn't reading right, or moving the blue cooler or warmer as necessary until I got the color that appeared the way I wanted it to. And they mentioned that a lot of times when artists are coloring a gray tone piece, and I'll show you, this is the image, the way it actually came out colored. I think there's another layer that's turned on here that's blocking. Oh no, there's a mask in this layer. Let me turn off the layer mask. So this is sort of the base painting that I started working with. And I knew that I wanted to have like a blue, I wanted to go with warm in just terms of the fire that was around the pentagram, and then having that kind of cascade over Lucifer's shoulders and a little bit on his coat, but basically kind of having the rest of the image having a cool palette. Now I have tried, when I was working on this piece earlier, painting more and more reds around it, almost so that the blue of the halo around him was only just sort of at the edges. There was really a lot more red in it, but the red did not come out well at all using the color layer. It came out very poorly. You can see even on this image, it's kind of chalky. That was one of the things that was discussed, is when you're coloring, in some of the videos I looked at, what was discussed was when you try to do the approach of just coloring in color mode on top of a grayscale image, if the values are not well worked out, then what you end up getting is a very distorted view. You've got a lot of dull colors that don't read and don't well at all, and some that pop out kind of garishly. And I had tried painting multiple times with this, and I had painted the skin tones in color mode multiple times, and they just did not come out well. So I created a separate layer, and I painted skin on top on a separate layer. I deleted the part of the color layer, or actually I didn't save a version of this that has how much farther I took this particular image using the color mode method. But basically, I added skin tones on a separate layer, and I wasn't happy with the skin tones because they didn't have a nice, rich, they didn't have a warmth to the skin tone. It still felt a little too chalky instead of chocolatey. Lucifer's more kind of on the light skin side of black skin tones, but this just came out a little bit chalky. It didn't feel rich enough. And it's probably because I didn't add enough red warm colors to sort of to warm it up to give it that sense of underneath the skin, having the blood vessels and the warmth, supernatural creature or not. And also, one of the other things that I didn't preserve in my working process, and I wish I had actually been able to record this when I was working on it, so you could see the whole process of me doing the trial and error. At the time I was working on this, I was mostly doing it during my lunch breaks and at work. And with my laptop is very, very old and just does not have the power to record this and work in Photoshop at the same time. So I just have to kind of, make do. But I realized I could show you just through still images the process of what I went through and the decision making. So at this point, one of the things that I cannot show you, is how I had painted additionally into this color mode, because I had left a lot more of the gray values that are in the image to see through this, so that the wings had a lot more gray to them, and I sort of softly painted into the layer mask. Or actually, I think I had only painted in not as much full blue as there was. I sort of painted back some of it so that it was less saturated around the edges and grayer. But in terms of the central figure, if you look at the area just around his bandana, his hands, his face, the gun, the values were too garish, and it wasn't as subdued as I wanted. So it was a challenge of trying to find, because I have a very primary color palette. I overuse colors. I go a little bit too brightly. I don't do things kind of in the warm, mellow earth tones that a lot of classical artists, a lot of the old masters use. And I want to start practicing doing pieces more in that value range. But one of the things that I went through when I realized I wasn't happy with this and needed to try a different method was just going back and recoloring. I turned off this color layer and I switched to a gradient map. Now, gradient maps were something that Stanley Lau mentioned in his video as a way for creating some contrast in basically to set up an underpainting so that you're not just painting directly on gray. The first thing to keep it from getting muddy is to already give it a little bit of a warmth, a little bit of a sepia tone. And I've got to give a shout out to my friend John Ercek. He's a comic creator, a color artist, and he's the first person who actually showed me how to use gradient maps. And I've used them here and there on a few illustration pieces. And I haven't consistently used them because I found that I overuse them, like as I do anytime I learn a new toy. And I would have like 8 or 9 gradient maps on a like 800 meg file, and I would just do too many and would crash, and one piece became corrupted when I was trying to color the entire thing using a series of masked out gradient maps. But in this place, it seemed like it was a good place to come back to it. So John definitely deserves a shout out for that, because it's a lot of times people will tell me, anyone who knows me personally will know that they will tell me things that are really good ideas that I should start doing, and then years later I come around to it. So I'm slowly getting to the point now where instead of years, it may be a few months before I start putting it into practice. Mainly because I need to actually play with it and figure out how to do it right. But so I started with just this basic gradient map. This image alone, I'm way happier with. Just cutting back a lot of the clutter, it doesn't feel as garish. It's a much more simpler, muted version. It's closer to the grayscale image that I originally painted. And in fact, I kind of had to fight myself internally and ask, do I really want to do a full color version versus just making the piece work as this? And eventually I ended up, because I felt like the yellows and oranges of the flames were valuable, then it was worth it for me to go ahead and push forward. But I was very tempted to just say, all right, no, you know what? Nice sepia valued piece. I'll work with it like this. I turned the skin color layer back on, and that seemed to be helping. Now, the next step was me going in and painting in the orange and the red, and painting in the flames, and just seeing where that was going to carry me. I still hadn't decided whether I was going to have just the flames and not add in all of the other colors in the image, or, maybe just leave it, or continue to pursue the image I had in my head, which from my thumbnails had the blue colors sort of around the outer fringes of the kind of framing the figure and outside the flaming halo. Now, in this part, this is where I started getting a little bit off of the reservation. This is where the real problem solving came in, and me thinking, all right, well, how do I want to do this? And I did something that is not what I consider a typical painting process. But a few years back, I had taken a class with the artist Weston. He teaches at Art Center and several other places in Southern California. He's also a background painter, an environmental artist for a lot of animated television. I believe he did the backgrounds and the environments for, The Legend of Korra, Nickelodeon? Anyway, a very accomplished artist and instructor. And I'd taken a class with him on drawing environments and props. And what I remember specifically when he showed us doing some digital work, a lot of times he would take gray tone images and he would colorize them using hue saturation layers and using them in multiple successions, masking some out, turning pieces, adjusting the colors as needed, and then adding multiple ones to it instead of just painting. And I'm not saying that that's the main way he works, because I have not taken his digital painting class. One of the things that I've learned from this is that I do want to take his digital painting class the next time he's offering it. I'm going to sign up for it. But what I decided to do with this piece was I first found the orange that I want, that I imagined the flames being. So I turned on a hue saturation layer, and I turned that layer all the way up, tweaked it around so I got the values I wanted. Then I masked the entire layer out, meaning I took the layer mask, filled it with black so that it was gone again. Then I went to that layer mask and painted with white to reveal the orange. When you paint into a layer mask, what is white is what is visible. What is black is masked out or invisible. So I was doing a very odd method. Instead of just creating a new layer and painting the colors I wanted on it. And I think I wanted this flexibility because I knew I was going to kind of modulate these colors as I went. And I liked the idea of using it on a hue saturation layer instead of painting all these colors together on a single layer. It seemed like I had more of a sense of control of a bunch of sliders as opposed to trying to figure out which layers I needed to change the layer effect on and maybe set to a different color mode. Which layers I painted 2 different colors on. So now if I want to make a change to one, I either need to go into the hue saturation adjustment and then pick out the individual colors. It seemed like it was simpler to just pick a few colors, make them hue saturation layers, get them the color I want, and then just only make them visible in the areas that worked for me. And then try to let more of the gray of the underpainting show through. After that, I added the yellow and the orange. So at this point, I really had to make my decision. Do I want to go full bore with the blues and purples or not? The purples were very, very subtle. In fact, they don't even really show up that much as purple. They look more like a kind of a peachish, pinkish, violet thing here. But I just used these to have sort of a little bit of reflected light coming up underneath the arm of Lucifer and a little bit on the inside of the jacket to kind of add a little bit more visual volume. Now, with the blue, that is directly what I was imagining in my thumbnail. That was a challenge for me in the sense that I knew that it was going to be kind of a weird contrast or kind of a clashy look to have it go so much from the bright, having the red and oranges red on top of these blues. I imagine in a more thought out color scenario or something that if I were trying to paint this in a more naturalistic sense instead of a heightened imaginary sense, I would have really had the reds fill up most of the background. I don't think you would have even gotten any blue in here. You might have gotten a little bit of the purples that are in the range on the edges of the flame, but you would have gotten that at the edge of the entire piece instead of getting the blues that are here. Now, at this point, the image is pretty close to what I thumbnailed out. The next challenge that I had was sort of polishing it and putting the finishing touches on there. One of the things I've realized is that I color way too dark. Now, when I was talking about my values. In my values, I tend to make those too dark as well, just in general, painting grayscale. But that just carries over to the color pieces too. And what I've learned, and I did this for the first time when I did the latest issue of Morningstar, was printing out a final image on photo paper to look at how it prints in comparison to how it looks on my monitor. And that's something that I know from doing graphic design work, that we print out. They're not even proofs, they're just prints on a printer. But being able to look at that and compare it, we can say, oh wait, this is not, we may think it looks one way in our monitor, but it does not look the same in real life. And I've realized that anytime I do a color piece, I need to always do that consistently so I can go back and tweak the values. Now in print, I saw just how dark this piece was. Now I had added a little bit of texture to the background to kind of, I guess I went through and I played with the brush strokes in the background a little bit more, but I didn't feel like painting in clouds. I just wanted to have something that added a little bit more of a gritty Western finish to it. So I painted in some values, and then I also added a hue saturation layer to kind of lighten the whole thing up. And on my monitor, it looked to me like that was too light, but in printing it out, it got much closer to what I was going for. That's something you always have to remember, is what is going to be the final format for whatever piece you're working on, and trying to make sure that's going to look good in those formats. So from there, it was really just a matter of heightening and in some cases lightening even more, because even though it's a little bit grayer on my screen than I was hoping for, a little bit more washed out, I went through and I added in succession a layer where I adjusted the curves and I added a little bit more saturation, but lightening it up a little bit. Then I added another layer with levels and made it even brighter. It also gave it kind of a nice sort of a little glow on the underside of the wings, a little bit of a Maxfield Parrish glow. And then adding just a little bit more just around the face, around the head, using the curves to really punch it up so that the places with the absolute most saturation and contrast in the piece were around the face. Because again, I don't think I did as good of a job of blocking in my values so that the whole piece doesn't have as much contrast. Well, see, again, that's a problem that Noah Bradley brought up in his tutorial, was that artists often feel like they have to put in too much contrast. But for me, it was trying to figure out how to make the face stand out when contrast tends to be my main tool, while at the same time keeping the face within the values that seem to be working for me. So I used saturation of color as a tool instead of actual contrast, because they say that you can contrast in terms of values, you can contrast in terms of edges, and I forget what the third one is off the top of my head, but there's 3 different ways you can use to create contrast or to create a sense of separation between pieces. So you can have like soft to hard edges, light to dark, and then temperature, color temperature, that's the other one. So yeah, this piece I was trying to do one completely different method of coloring it, wasn't working, humbled me, which, we all need that when we're working on a piece to come back and say, all right, what are the things I don't know? So I still have a whole lot more work to do in terms of learning how to properly paint grayscale value paintings first, to work out those values before I go into doing color work. It does also beg the question that, do I really need to do that versus just working in direct color? And I don't feel like it's one or the other. I feel like I need to learn how to do both. I feel like learning how to do better values will make me better. That's a road to being able to do direct color. Because if I'm bad at values, then I'm going to botch direct color anyway. So it's not necessarily, there's one school or the other. I look at, eventually, I probably will just be hopefully develop a good enough sense of value that I can go and just paint a piece completely in color, not doing a gray tone level beforehand. But this piece specifically showed me how much more I have to learn. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, please like and share them. Don't forget to click the subscribe button. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter to get a free digital comic at newsletter.jeremy.net. That's newsletter.gerimi.net. Also, visit my main website, jeremy.net, where you can buy my comic books, art prints, and more. There's also links to my Instagram, Twitter, and other social media accounts. That's it for now. Go be creative.